Good afternoon or good morning to everyone on the line. Welcome to today's presentation. My name is Maria Noesi and I will be your host and moderator. We are very excited to have all of you join us for today's presentation on building student resiliency, a new tool for students to manage their mental health. Today, I'm joined by a panel of presenters who have been a part of the creation of the new and updated Kognito at-risk mental health for students simulation, and they will share their insights. However, before I hand it over to them, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, today's presentation is being recorded, so don't worry about taking notes. We will send you a copy of both the recording and the slides after the presentation. Attendees will also have access to the simulation that we're going to be showing you today as well. During the presentation, attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we have dedicated time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. So we encourage you to submit questions through the GoToWebinar interface, and we will get to as many of those as possible at the end of the webinar. If you are on social media, feel free to connect with us there on Twitter or submit questions through the hashtag Kognito webinars as well. Finally, to sort of get us started in the right frame of mind, I want to launch a poll question for you. So I invite you to come over to your screen and share with us. The question is, how prepared are your students to navigate conversations around mental health? Would you say they're very prepared, somewhat prepared, not prepared at all, or you're not sure? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to respond. Again, the question is, how prepared are your students to navigate conversations around mental health? All right, so let's see the results. It looks like 69% of you said they're either somewhat prepared and they could benefit from additional training and education. 19% of you are not sure, and 11% say that they're not prepared at all, with no one saying that the students are very prepared, which not surprising. So we hope that the conversation that is sparked today can continue the conversations about what else can we do to make sure our students are equipped with the right skills and knowledge to support not only their friends, but have a successful academic year on campus. Now let's go ahead and pivot to the agenda for today's discussion. Our presenters are going to cover a little bit about what the current student mental health landscape looks like, how can campuses support their students this upcoming school year, the importance of students investing in themselves and in peer-to-peer support, and of course, an overview of the new at-risk mental health simulation. So with that, I want to introduce our presenters and share a little bit about who they are. We are joined by Dr. Victor Schwartz, who is the Chief Medical Officer at the Jed Foundation. Victor has over 25 years of experience as a psychiatrist working in college mental health. He's a clinical associate professor of psychiatry at NYU School of Medicine. Victor was the medical director of NYU's counseling services and has established a counseling center at Yeshiva University, where he subsequently served as the University Dean of Students. He was an original member of the American Psychiatric Association's Presidential Task Force on College Mental Health, and he's the co-chair of the APA Working Group on Legal Issues in College Mental Health and is an APA Distinguished Life Fellow. Victor also serves as a co-chair of the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatric Committee on the College Student and has served as an advisor to HBO, Dear Evan Hansen, the NCAA, the NFL, and the NBA. Welcome, Victor. We're also joined by Dr. Kelly Kettlewell, who is the director of the Counseling and Student Development Center at Bucknell University. Dr. Kettlewell is a licensed psychologist who earned her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Maryland. And as I mentioned, she currently serves as the director of the Counseling and Student Development Center at Bucknell. And finally, we are joined by Kim Weiland. She serves as the product manager for Kognito's educational vertical and has served in many roles across education, business, and nonprofits, with a focus on helping communities build capacity to tackle challenges and seize opportunities at the local level. Prior to joining Kognito, Kim served as the executive director of the Industrial Supply Association, which represents one of the largest manufacturing and distribution channels. So welcome to each of our presenters. I look forward to the conversation for today. And with that, I want to hand it over to Dr. Schwartz to get us started. Take it away.
Thanks, Maria. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Sorry we couldn't be in person, but I guess even without COVID, this probably would have happened virtually. So we're here in the sort of virtual landscape. So let's talk just for a couple minutes about what we're seeing in terms of the impact of COVID on students' feelings, emotions, mental health, and just a word of caution that some of the things I think that you're likely reading out there, and this is, I suppose, an example of this, and this is a survey that Active Minds, one of our partner organizations who, work on campus, many of you are familiar with, they did of a number of students in the sort of early period, as you see in April of 2020 around COVID, and you have to be careful in the way we interpret this. So you can see here that 80% of students reported that they'd experienced a negative impact on their mental health as a result of COVID. A number of people, and remember this was the early period when campuses had largely quickly shifted to providing mental health and counseling services virtually. So a little bit more than half the students said they weren't sure where to go for help, and that's not so different, quite honestly, as for the numbers that we would see for students when campus was open in its usual condition. 20%, so 1 out of 5, reported their mental health significantly worsening. Nearly 4 out of 10 had trouble focusing, which I think we've seen in all of the surveys. And this is, I think an important element of the stress is that nearly half the students had financial impact of both their campuses closing, of needing to move, of often cases also losing employment, potentially losing tuition and some of their housing money. Campuses handle this very differently. And about 3/4 were having a challenge maintaining their routine. So I just want to note that the 80% who said that the COVID had a negative impact on their mental health, I think we need to understand that to mean that students were experiencing upsurges in anxiety and stress related to their mental health, which is related to COVID, which is completely expectable in a highly stressful circumstance. So we need to not overdiagnose what would be a typical response to an extremely, extremely stressful and challenging circumstance. Students felt worse. That doesn't mean that they necessarily had higher rates of diagnosable mental illness during this period of time. And if we can go to the next slide, there's some data here from the Healthy Minds study together, which is out of the University of Michigan, although actually the principal investigators have now moved to other institutions. But many of you may be familiar with the Healthy Minds study, which surveys large numbers of students around their health attitudes, mental health attitudes, and behaviors. And they, together with the American College Health Association's National College Health Assessment, also did a survey early on asking students about their responses to COVID. Now they, just to be clear, used content from the GAD-7, so they use some screening tools, the PHQ-9, the GAD-7, but here again, those are asking people about symptoms, and you might actually screen positive on the GAD-7, which is a screener for anxiety, or the PHQ-9, which is a screener for depression, in high stress atmospheres. So these don't necessarily indicate a diagnosable anxiety or depression, but clearly the numbers went up somewhat in relation to those things. As you see here, 60% of students said that their COVID had made it more difficult to access mental health care, and this again reflects the fact that schools had to very quickly pivot. Symptoms of mental health problems were, started out high enough and remained high. I mean, there were some curious drops. The prevalence of depression appeared to increase, but with the proviso that I suggested. Interestingly, substance use decreased, and that may have been a function of both students staying in more students potentially having moved home. And that was true not only of general substance use, but of binge drinking as well. And we know that a higher proportion of students reported that their mental health was negatively impacted, but we need to be careful about how we interpret that. And students reported higher levels of resiliency and lower levels of loneliness. And actually, it's a complicated data. I would urge all of you to look at the report because it's very interesting. Loneliness went down. Resiliency went up during the early stages of COVID. Curiously, they also reported serious psychological distress went down. The one concerning indicator was in the NCHA data, it looked like suicide risk went up, although Healthy Minds reported that suicidal ideation actually went down slightly. So it's a complicated picture, and people respond to acute stresses in different ways, but clearly there was a major challenge around the pivot of services to virtual services. If we can move to the next slide. So taking a look at some potentially higher risk population, what did we find around different student populations? And there are again some interesting findings here. And this is a long-standing comparison. So a couple of years ago, the Healthy Minds study actually published a paper looking at their data, National College Health Assessment data, and curiously, Black students actually reported lower levels of a number of the findings that are looked at in both of those studies. Lower levels of hopelessness, lower levels of feeling overwhelmed, lower levels of hopelessness and loneliness and sadness, and actually lower rates of anxiety and depression. The only actual areas where Black students reported a higher incidence of problems were around suicide attempts and anger, which is curious. I mean, the other curious thing is that there were actually lower rates of suicidal ideation slightly among Black students. The one thing that is a notable and concerning difference, though, is that Black students are less likely to report that they've sought out support and care when they're in trouble. And that's true both on the academic side and the mental health side. So while there is an argument to be made, and actually I made this argument in a brief op-ed piece in the journal Psych Services last year, that it could be that the cohort of Black students who are coming to college campuses might arguably be more resilient and have lower rates of problems than students in general. They're also way more hesitant to ask for help when they are having problems, which is concerning, and certainly the concern about increased rate of suicide attempts is, potentially a reflection of the fact that it feels more difficult for them for a variety of reasons to reach out and ask for help. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Kim.
Kim, are you able to unmute yourself? Well, while we wait for Kim to jump on the line, let's actually invite Dr. Kelly Kettlewell to get us started on a little bit of what can be done to support students this upcoming school year. Kelly, can you share with us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Maria. And thanks for everyone for joining today. It's nice to be a part of a conversation as we're all navigating a difficult time where we have multiple crises unfolding that are inevitably affecting our lives and our students' lives, and what it's going to be like to be in a role of supporting students during this fall 2020 semester and likely beyond. So certainly, as Victor alluded to, in terms of painting the picture of what our students are coming back to campus, experiencing, sitting with, feeling, thinking, I've really been trying to think about how we can broadly talk about support for our students and seeing this as a campus-wide initiative. Oftentimes, the counseling center is seen as kind of the one and only go-to place for all mental health needs. And I think given, again, the fact that we're in a period of time where there are multiple crises piled on top of one another, this really does need to be a time where we look for opportunities to say everyone on campus can play a role in supporting mental health. Of course, there are a subset of students who do need to connect with a professional mental health provider, housed likely in the counseling center on our individual campuses. But I actually think that there are so many opportunities to really engage that peer-to-peer support, empower faculty and staff to play a role in supporting healthy, kind of healthier campus-wide conversations around the importance of mental health. I know there's not a one-size-fits-all for institutions, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. Some folks have invested in models such as stepped care, and certainly as a counseling center director, I'm well aware that there is not a one-size-fits-all that can solve our concerns. So I think it's important to, again, consider how we can involve all sorts of campus members in thinking about providing that support, especially as we come into this fall semester.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Maria. I was able to finally get off mute. Scott, if you want to go to the next slide. So I want to spend a little bit of time following up on some of the things that Kelly and Vic talked about, and that is really this idea that supporting mental health is important. It always has been important. This isn't a new topic. But what are some of the things that we can invest in campus-wide to really help to support student mental and emotional health? And one of the things that Kognito and Jed have worked together for a long time to do is to really understand what's happening on college campuses. Do faculty and staff feel that it's part of their role to recognize when other students might be in distress, to reach out to them and to help them connect with services? One of the things that we've seen, and we've done several surveys and continue to work with universities like Bucknell and others to really understand, is that what we know is that students very much see this as part of their role. They want to be empowered to know how to provide support to fellow students and faculty as well. Where the numbers go down is really in how prepared they feel to have those conversations. And so that's really where our product has focused in the past, is to help improve the self-advocacy of those who already want to provide support and help them with the types of conversation skills and the confidence to approach those conversations and really make sure that they are the most positive conversations. So if you want to go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about our mission, and we'll go into the product. As we go through, I'm going to have Kelly and Vic talk just a little bit about not only why we made certain decisions for the updates to our mental health product, but as well as what they've already been talking about, which is how we support students and faculty in this moment. So our mission here at Kognito is that we really believe that through the science of learning and the art of conversation, that we can improve social, emotional, and physical health. We do that through our virtual human simulations and the ability, giving students and faculty the ability to not only learn the knowledge of a certain topic, but also be able to practice skill sets. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is our current higher ed product line. You'll see that it's based here on topic, but really what we focus on as a company is what are the skill sets that we want to equip and power students with and faculty with that will really help long-term with their success. So there are core skills like communication skills, bystander skills, help-seeking skills, and others that, while they can be related to one of these specific topics, they're also a skill set that can be used in many other areas, not just for a student's time in college, but as well as they move on and have a successful career after college. So we're going to talk specifically about at-risk mental health for students today. It is a product that has been in our portfolio for almost a decade now. It has been adopted by over 350 colleges and universities, and we've trained over 300,000 students. It is an evidence-based product and uses core evidence type skills such as motivational interviewing, but it has also been shown to increase self-efficacy and lead to actual behavior change, especially around help-seeking behavior and supporting peers. So we decided it was time to update that product and really add some of the other pieces that our partners and universities were asking us to add. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about what the new simulation looks like. It is still around the same amount of time, so we wanted to keep it around that 40-minute interactive so that students felt that it was a good use of their time, kept it within something that is really appropriate to what will keep their attention. The learning objectives have stayed close to the same. We still have as a core objective the ability to recognize and identify the signs of psychological distress in both self and peers. It's important that students are able to reflect not only on the concerns that they may have or warning signs that they see in a peer, but also be able to recognize those in themselves. The core has always been how to utilize effective communication techniques to talk with a peer who shows signs of distress. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but the research shows that those effective communication techniques, while they're taught and modeled here as talking to a peer, they are the same types of communication techniques that are useful when a student is talking to themselves. So what are those internal conversations that we have with ourselves? And we actually have some very telling quotes from students who talk about really taking it easier on themselves and some of the ways that they pressure and talk to themselves. And then very important to understand, refer, and utilize available support services. We have changed all of the scenarios within the sim to show a much broader where students can access those types of services. So looking well beyond the counseling center. And then new is to use strategies to practice self-reflection and really that then set goals for well-being that are based on the student's idea of what it means to flourish, what relates to them as self-care, and really drafting their own plan there. I want to just pause a little bit and open this up for Kelly to talk a little bit about some of these other areas that we have looked at for support services and why it was important to broaden that.
Thank you, Kim. And before I kind of hop into that piece, I think to set the stage for that, one of the ways that we've often thought about having these critical conversations about mental health, checking in with peers, or for faculty and staff to be checking in with students, is that one of the things I've often noticed is that when we start talking about mental health and specifically about thoughts of suicide or suicide prevention, is what I've noticed is that oftentimes people will say, well, this is a really hard conversation. This is something that's really, really hard to talk about. And what I've come to understand is that if we kind of substitute out the word hard for important, we'd probably do ourselves a better service. So if we can say, this is a really important conversation to have. My fear is that when we use the word hard or difficult, what we're doing is decreasing people's confidence in thinking that they would have what it takes to have these conversations. So when I look to these learning objectives and I think about expanding support beyond the counseling center on campus, this program kind of cuts at that. This is important for all of us to be talking about, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have the skills and are ready to do it. It may mean that you need to learn and learn the skills and build your confidence. So shifting back into that, understanding support services outside of the counseling center, I think one of the things that I'll often say in conversation is that if the counseling center on any individual campus, at our campus, that means 8 clinicians, if there are only 8 clinicians at Bucknell who can have a conversation about mental health, then we're really in trouble. The campus is not going to be prepared to support comprehensively individual students. And so having a dialogue where it's everybody's role. So that may be partnering, the counseling center may partner with colleagues across campus, maybe in religion and spiritual life, to co-facilitate a support group, or multicultural student services to co-facilitate a support group or a discussion series, so that the counseling center may still be a part of some of those conversations, but also very much strategically investing in partnerships with folks across campus. And then again, also investing in opportunities to engage with faculty and staff around, this isn't about becoming a psychologist or a counselor or a therapist. This is about developing those communication skills to build connection with students who may be struggling, so that you can get to a point where a student would feel comfortable talking with you. And again, I do believe that we can all have a role in that on our campuses.
And if I can add just a comment, sort of piggybacking on what Kelly said, but from a slightly different axis. So she's talking about, sort of spreading out the awareness and responsibility across the campus. I think the big change that occurred, and I'm sure, Kim, you'll talk about this more in the description of the product, but that the self-reflection and well-being, the kind of self-care content that's been added to this also widens the scope of the training. One of the concerns I've always had with gatekeeper trainings is when they're too crisis and suicide focused, it actually makes people anxious, and they're worried that if they don't know how to do it just right, then they might mess it up. But by broadening the focus of this to looking at, well-being and, distress and mental health with a wider and more general lens, and looking at crisis as just the kind of extreme of that, it begins to convey that, this is part of a bigger package. There are things that people can do to help themselves feel better, to take care of themselves or each other, hopefully before we get to the crisis point. And one of the important considerations is, how do we get better at recognizing how to distinguish the thing that is the kind of routine life problem versus something that really is verging into a more serious or dangerous place.
So Scott, if you want to go to the next slide, that's such a great piece. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things that both of you mentioned about how these are important conversations, and to really broaden the idea of what these stressors are, and the options that students have as they're facing these different levels of stressors. And Vic, that goes back to even the data that you were showing at the beginning, which is lots of students are feeling much more stressed in this moment. Not that they weren't stressed before, but now this is added on top of it. Does all of that mean that each of those students who are experiencing those stressors are now at a diagnosable level? No. So what are some of the other ways that we can model and support students as they are really starting to think about how they reflect on what's going on in themselves and their peers and build out those skill sets? So one of the things that we did with this is we did increase the overall focus on resiliency skills. And I know that resiliency can be a bit of a loaded term. So what do we mean when we say that? We have several scenarios within the product, the simulation, that are modeling different types of stressors that students may face, whether it's school, it's a relationship, it's financial, and each of them has a different way that they look to find help with those and to work through those. So we were able to model what help seeking looks like. We're able to model what different types of self-care look like, and not just self-care from the standpoint of it's important to exercise or those types of things, but much broader. And that means, what does it mean to invest in yourself? You know, Kelly talks a lot about how it's really important as they're developing things on campus is to focus on making it that they are helping students feel empowered to know that it's important to invest in themselves, and there are ways that the campus is supporting that. And this whole idea of the self-care checklist and plan, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and what that actually looks like. I was going to have a little bit more on this slide, but Victor and Kelly, you guys covered so much of it so well that we'll keep moving so that we have time at the end for questions. So just very quickly, the overview of the user experience here is that we use the term didactic. That's a very dry internal term, but what it really means is those are where they're getting more of the knowledge. So we never want to have anybody practice skills without having been taught those skills. So they're going to go through and be taught what does it look like to recognize warning signs in others and as well as themselves. What does it look like to reflect on those and determine, you know, what types of stressors they might be facing? And then we specifically go into the conversation skills. And on the next slide, I'll talk to you a bit about what those are. And then in supporting a friend, you actually get to go in and practice an actual conversation. And the goal here is to really take out the fear or concern of having these questions. As Kelly mentioned, it's changing it from this is a difficult conversation to this is an important conversation and I feel confident that I know how to have this. And then we go into out of that into the idea that it's also important to take care of yourself and invest in yourself. And then you get to walk through an activity that is a self-care plan, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So if you want to go to the next slide. So we use conversation skills that, again, as I said, are really important to improving overall conversation and connectedness. When we talk about resiliency, it's really important to be talking about what are the skills that help faculty and staff and students so really build out community connectedness. And so these are what we would call motivational interviewing light. We use these because they are evidence-based communication skills, and we reframe them into the language that somebody who is 18, 19, 20 is going to relate to. So the key ones here are avoiding negative labels, using non-judgmental language. We teach how to use neutral statements and how to use things like open-ended questions to help other people open up. The way we do that within the simulation is we actually play out a conversation over text message. And I think it's really important to show that these skill sets are not just able to be used in person, but also that they're important and can be used in all of the other formats that students are typically communicating in. So we want to make it really accessible to them, meet them where they are, understanding that text and FaceTime and other ways are how students are currently connecting. Before we go into the actual conversation, if you want to go to the next slide, Scott, I'm going to do a bit of a demo, but I would love, Kelly, you talk about this a lot, and I would just love to have you speak a little bit more on why it's so important that students get to practice this conversation.
Sure, thanks, Kim. And that really comes from the feedback we received from students when we've, prior to our using Kognito on our campus, would still be doing workshops and programs and training with student leaders to think about ways to support a resident, a peer, a friend. And what we always found were lots of grumbling about doing the role plays in those trainings, but that the role plays were often the most powerful take home for each of the students. So that it's one thing to kind of have an intellectual conversation about why you might think it's important to ask a certain question, or you might be able to even teach what are some of the observable signs of distress. But the very act of being able to practice is, I think, what breaks down the barriers for these conversations to actually happen. The practice is where that confidence can really come from. We've often done in follow-up workshops practice where, we'll turn in dyads and have them, continue to literally hear the words coming out of their own mouths. How would they phrase this question to a peer or a friend or a hallmate? And again, I think that's where the confidence can really start to build. If we can say, if you can practice these conversations now, so that it's not the first time you're thinking about how you might phrase a question, if you really are talking to a friend in distress, your anxiety might be running a little high, nerves might be running high in a conversation like that. How much better would you be if you have practiced ahead of that? More confident, more calm. We know the more calm someone can be as they're having this conversation with someone in distress, the better the conversation's going to go. So the practice is just critical in building that kind of calm confidence so that they can take that into the real life conversation.
So I'm going to take us into a demo. Some of the things that we do within the conversation to really meet students where they are and help them as they are practicing is that they do get to make the decisions based on what they feel that they would actually say. And then they will be provided feedback on those, and they'll get to see how the other student responds to them. So everything from their body language to how it made them feel. So really being able to do this in a safe space. And I think that's what's really important. Role plays in person are wonderful, and they can really set those students up to have those conversations. But we also know that there's something to be said for doing this in a safe space where it doesn't matter if you mess up, you're not worrying about what the other student that you're role playing with is sort of thinking about what you're saying because you don't want to be embarrassed. You really get to play this out in a really safe place, and you get coaching that has real fidelity on it. So all of our coaching text that is in here really comes from our SMEs and our experts around how the best way is to have these conversations. And it's phrased in such a way that your coaching feedback is going to be positive. So even when you're trying to nudge them towards a different thing, it's really phrased in a way that is, you're having this conversation, this is a good thing, this is positive, here's how you could maybe do this a little bit differently to get them open up more. And it's very accessible, and as you saw in the feedback from students, they overwhelmingly respond to this. So we won't spend too much time in the demo, only because when going through GoToMeeting, there is a bit of a delay. So bear with us on that, but we do want to model it for you, and then you will get a demo link so you can go in and play around with this as well. So Scott, if you want to start the conversation.
A lot.
And everything's piling up. Plus, work has been super busy, and my sister has been really sick, so I have to pull extra uncle duty, and I've kind of had some drama with people lately, which isn't helping at all.
So the students will use this talk section up here, and they'll be given different options of which they can choose. We're going to start with express concern. We're going to hop right in. Let's go with, I haven't seen you in class since Professor Brown.
I don't think I've seen you in class since Professor Brown wanted to meet with you. How'd that go?
Oh, fine. She was all, don't text during class. Why aren't your assignments in on time? What's up with your attitude lately? Whatever.
Nothing about that group work day?
Well, yeah, that came up.
I was on the other side of the room. I just heard the end of it. What happened?
Well, nothing happened. No one in the group was stepping up to do the work, and I just had this feeling it was all going to land on me again. Then Olivia shot me this attitude, and some words were said.
Some chairs were kicked?
Just one chair. Look, I'm done playing nice with those slackers.
So your first one's going to be a little bit longer. This gives some of the students some backstory that they will then play off of. For this, because I picked a neutral statement, so I started off with a positive intro. If you want to show, Scott, if you want to show that, the coach will give you feedback. And because we asked a question that was neutral, Travis has opened up more, so we've gotten more background on what he's going through. So let's keep going. So let's go with follow-up, and we worked on a project.
We worked on a project together and it went great. What's going on?
Yeah, well, you pulled your weight. These jokers don't. I already feel like I'm drowning and I have to do everything for them too. I guess no one else is taking school seriously. Maybe I shouldn't even be here.
So again, I used another somewhat neutral statement, so my coaching text is going to give me that feedback as well. So now let's try one that we will get feedback on to maybe change how we phrase something. So let's go to problem solve. And let's go to you're giving up too easy.
You're giving up too easy.
You think this is easy? Jess, you don't know anything about it. So lay off, okay? I don't need this from you.
So because this is a place where we feel that we can have some positive feedback on how we might phrase this a little bit differently, you do get the coach pops up for you. So Scott, if you want to continue, we'll do one more. And let's go to respond, because this is actually some of the feedback we get through students. If they have a big aha moment, which almost all of them do, it's this idea of jumping directly into giving feedback or then making it about them, which is many of you are professionals know it's not the best way to get somebody to open up. So let's go to don't be so sensitive.
Okay, wow, don't be so sensitive. I'm just trying to help.
Well, I don't need your help.
So we'll leave it here. We want to send this demo out so you guys can go through. As you go through the conversation, there is a point at which Travis will make you a little bit concerned that he may be thinking about suicide. The reason we have that in there, even though he does not end up being suicidal, is because we want to make sure that there is coaching text in here, that it is okay to be direct in asking that question, that does not put that idea in their mind. So for those who are implementing this as part of a suicide prevention plan, it's important that that remained in there as well. So let's go to self-care, and then we'll open it up to questions. So this last section is really based on investing in yourself. Self-care can seem trite at this point because it gets talked about a lot. The goal here was not to do that. The goal here was to really give students the space to reflect on their own, what's going on in their own lives, and teach the skill of how to do that, and then have them create their own action plans on the things that they felt related to them and would help them thrive and flourish. I'll turn this over to Kelly. You have a really great way of talking about the importance of this section. So.
Sure. So one of the things that, as we're thinking about building confidence and ideally preparing students to connect with their peers, one of the foundational pieces must be understanding yourself, kind of helping the student understand where they're coming from. And a piece of that, of course, needs to be in investing. So self-reflection, thinking through, there may be specific behaviors that help them feel like they have enough kind of energy, mental space, empathic space to be able to follow up with a peer. So that's where I see those two things going hand in hand, that not only is this an opportunity just for standalone students to understand that investing in your own mental health is important, but certainly there's a connection between being able to show up for others if you are feeling more grounded and more close to your best. So that's where the investing in yourself piece feels very critical.
And Vic, before we go to questions, would you like to add a little bit about this section, which was so important for us to add into this new program?
Well, I mean, essentially what I said before is that really giving students a broader sense that there are things that they can do to care for themselves and their friends, and that, mental health really it occurs across a spectrum of intensity and severity, and it's important to understand the range of that, I think is the value of this edition. I mean, it really, I think, rounds out the program in a very, very helpful way.
So Scott, if you want to go to the next slide. I think it's really important to always go back to what our students saying. We have two quotes here, but I just want to highlight things that we hear all the time. And that is that students want to feel empowered to support others. They want to feel that they are confident and are able to do this work. They're very motivated to do it. And we see that in survey after survey, and when we go and we talk directly to the students. But this first quote I think is really important, and one thing that we know about when we begin to talk about and model the types of positive ways to have a conversation around emotional health, and that is that it also changes how students are really thinking about help seeking for themselves and the conversations that they're having with themselves. In this first quote, she says, you know, this training has reminded me not to be too hard on myself during these times either, and to remember to take care of myself. I think those are two really important sides of this coin when we're really thinking, how do we make a strong, connected, supported campus and empower students on those campuses to really support each other and themselves. So we're going to open it up for questions. Hopefully we've left enough time. I'll defer mostly to Victor and Kelly on some of these questions, but Maria, if there are any specific around the product, I would love to answer those as well.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you, Victor and Kelly, for sharing with us and in giving us some insights about what's happening on campuses and how we can support students, and of course in your contribution in the updates and making the new Kognito mental health simulation even more impactful than it's been in the last 10 years. So one of the questions that came up even beforehand as folks were registering is, this may be a loaded question, but I would just love to hear your thoughts, is how do you see the strategy around, you know, campus mental health and the services provided to students changing in the upcoming semester as we continue to navigate uncertainty about, you know, remote versus in person? And so I would love to just hear from you, Victor, first on what your thoughts are about how things will evolve, and then in the upcoming months and even in the next year.
Yeah, everybody's trying to be a prognosticator, you know, and I think part of the reason for that is because it feels as if things going forward are so uncertain. So, you know, people are looking for some clarity and guidance where there isn't. What I can say is, I think schools and counseling centers and student affairs divisions need to have 2 or 3 different contingency plans in place. So, you know, as opposed to the spring where there was kind of less warning and people had to, you know, kind of make up what they were going to do while they were, you know, needing to do it. It would be great to be using the summertime when, you know, at the very least schools are way less busy, to try to think about, you know, what happens if what the school's currently planning needs to change quickly. So, you know, I think there needs to be awareness of planning at multiple levels of, you know, shifting to virtual, shifting to partial virtual contacts. And I think there's going to be a need to be very, very cognizant of the real life stresses of, you know, of what's happening. Students in more financial stress because of their own or family employment and economic challenges, and, you know, uncertainty even about whether to remain in school or to register for school, I think are going to be very, very significant challenges. And, you know, everybody will be needing to be prepared to change very quickly as the landscape changes.
Thank you so much, Victor. And Kelly, you know, you being boots on the ground, anything you would add to that?
Sure. One of the things I might add is just the importance, in part what you're talking about, Victor, of being prepared to be flexible, so that we know that we're likely going to be needing to make some shifts. And from a mental health perspective, you know, trying to think about where might there be opportunities to increase awareness around the importance of mental health in this current context. You know, there is a bit of a more universality in the way that students, staff, faculty, all of us are really sitting in uncertainty, which by nature we don't like. So there is opportunity to really connect in these challenges. Having said that, I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of individual differences and differential impacts, specifically when we talk about COVID-19. One of the ways I've heard it talk about, which I think is a good model, which is kind of same storm, different boats. We have to really be aware that while, yes, we are in this context together, different people are going to be experiencing this differently. Of course, critically to keep in mind, you know, are the disproportionate effects on our Black and Brown students coming back to campus, not only in the context of COVID-19, but also in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. Again, same storm, very different boats across campus. So we also need to keep that in mind as we're planning and being flexible.
And the one thing I would add to this is, in any crisis situation, and particularly this where things are changing so quickly, communication and having a really, good strategy to communicating as often and clearly as you can without overwhelming people with information is really, really important and quite challenging because, again, everybody doesn't necessarily have equal access to communication platforms, but really thinking through your strategy of giving people as much guidance about the things that they're obviously going to be concerned about as you can is going to be very, very valuable.
Thank you, Kelly and Victor. The next question that has also come up a few times is, how do we engage faculty as well? We spent a lot of time talking about peer-to-peer support and the skills that students need, but how do we also make sure that faculty are also equipped to talk with students, how to support them? And I actually just want to start with you, Kim, to talk about sort of the partner to the simulation that we've been discussing, and then open it up to Kelly and Victor as well.
Sure, and Kelly touched on this earlier, is that it's really important that we're not only teaching these skills and empowering students to support each other, but also doing that with faculty as well. Students have really been turning to faculty, and there's a lot of interest in being prepared to have those conversations in the best way, to really know where they're able to refer students. So we actually have a companion piece as well that is for both faculty and staff, and that is being, by most of the schools who use the student version, use the faculty one as well, knowing that when a student is seeking help, that they are most likely to turn to somebody who they trust, and sometimes that is a faculty or a staff member. So we want to make sure that at the same time that we're preparing students, that we're also preparing the faculty and staff as well.
And I'll add too, I think, as Kim was just saying, it often is a faculty and staff member that students may go to first, or who might be in a position to recognize a student who may be in distress, behaviors have changed. If I think about a lab science professor, they may see their student 4 times a week and really be able to track some changes across time. So those frontline vantage point folks need to also be informed. One of the things that's been effective on our campus, and we do use that partner program as well, the module for faculty and staff specifically, is that we try to be very clear that we're not asking faculty and staff to become therapists or counselors or mental health experts, but that we discuss it as an inevitability. It's inevitable that you will be in connection with a student who could benefit from supportive intervention. And so when we discuss it in that way, we very quickly partner it with, let's build some skills, right? How can we teach you how to do that? How can we build in the resources to consult if you run into difficulties in trying to do that? And that's where the module has been helpful. Again, on our campus, we partner that with some follow-up workshops for faculty and staff, in part so they get to know us at the counseling center, so that they may be the one having the conversation, but perhaps they do a 20-minute phone call as a consultation with one of our staff members ahead of time to kind of talk through, how can I feel prepared to go into this conversation? But often I find that faculty and staff, some will push back and say this isn't my job, but most, by and large, the vast majority say, I just don't know how. And so if I could build some skills, I would feel more confident to do this. And can I still make sure you all are there as the safety net? Absolutely, yes. And I think that combination is what has worked for us.
Wonderful. And because we are at the 2 o'clock Mark, I want to pause there. For any questions that are left outstanding, please go ahead and share them with us, and we will try to follow up with you after the webinar. As a reminder, we are going to be sending you the recording and the slides, as well as access to the simulation you saw so that you can access it at your own pace. With that, I want to thank Victor and Kelly and Kim for spending the last hour with us and sharing some insights. I look forward to the next conversation that we can have around this topic. And thank you to all of you that joined us for all of the work that you do to support our students, especially in today's climate. So take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.